So as we know, Subaru is in a tight-knit relationship with death, and the story of ReZero has no plot, has no substance, characters are flat, and the only purpose the show serves is torture porn for Subaru. With that being said, we all have this one question in our minds. How many times has Subaru died? So I decided to count all of Subaru's deaths and go over all of them within this video. Before I continue, spoiler warning, because I will be talking about the deaths that happen past the anime. Unimportant, because he dies every arc. I will be going in the chronological order, starting from arc 1 going to arc 3. There will be a counter on the top left or right, whichever one I decide, of the screen. But that is it for the intro. Take your guesses on how many deaths Subaru will have, and let's get straight into it.
Stay with me. Hang on. No matter what happens, I'm gonna save you.
So we have Subaru's first death in arc 1. He's cut through the abdomen from the bow hunter herself, Elsa Grindheart.
Slower and slower. Yes, slower and slower and slower and slower. Yes, you're slowly losing body heat.
I'm gonna die.
You're slowly growing cold.
Number 2, the second death, of course, once again comes from Elsa, slicing in her special spot of the bowels.
Hey, what are you doing?
Well, don't touch it, wasting him. Take anything he's got before selling.
Wait, the guard will be here any second.
Number 3, the third but accidental death comes from one of the 3 thugs, Chin, who accidentally stabbed Subaru.
Why?
The fourth death comes from a curse from when Subaru had visited the village.
What was that?
This death was done by the curse and by Rem, giving Rem her first kill.
That time I really like you both.
This death was very ambiguous, and a lot of people assumed that Rem killed him, but that is not the case. Rem did not kill Subaru, it was Ram instead. Ram did the finishing blow off screen.
I'm going to kill you!
I'm going to save you!
My man's jumped off a cliff. That's it. His next death comes from Puck, freezing Subaru alive.
Sleep. Along with my daughter.
Frozen by Puck again with a bit of decapitation, for the added cherry on top.
Leah is. Amelia is my entire reason for existing. There is no point in living in a world without her. The fog is coming.
Frozen for a third time, once again by Puck.
With the completion of the ordeal at hand, I've been given one final task to carry out. I'll be punished for it someday.
Do as you will, for I will never die.
Julius swings his sword and kills Subaru, that being the last death within the first season of the anime.
どっちも死なせない。お前たちを救うためなら、俺は何度でも。
Moving to the second season, which is still currently airing, the first death of the second season actually still pertained to arc 3, where Subaru grabs a knife and stabs himself. Now this scene in the anime was much different than the web novel, because the locations and weapons that were used were quite different. To move over into the web novel, we are starting with arc 4. In arc 4, on chapter 23, Subaru has just returned to the mansion from a few days at the sanctuary. Upon entering the mansion, he cannot find anyone. Neither Frederica nor Petra greet him, and did not respond to the calls of their names. As Subaru was wandering the mansion looking for someone, he suddenly slips. The object he slips on is not a rock, or a rug, but his own intestine. The bowel hunter Elsa Grindheart takes her third kill on Subaru, death by removal of bowels. A second death in Arc 4 is at Chapter 36. Subaru walks back in the sanctuary. He searches for any sign of life, but could not find any. He walks up to the tomb of Echidna and suddenly a hole appears through his heart. This hole is unknowingly caused from the Great Rabbit, death by eaten alive. The third death in Arc 4 comes at Chapter 43. Subaru, upon arriving unknowingly back at the sanctuary after getting thrown out of the Forbidden Library, Subaru arrives back at the tomb again. He notices a little white rabbit. Bending down to touch and pet the rabbit, his finger was bitten off, and then he proceeds to get jumped by a bunch of rabbits and eaten and chewed to death, which is the most gruesome thing I have ever read. Death by eating alive. The fourth death in Arc 4 happens at Chapter 51. This death comes after Satella manifests at the sanctuary. Subaru being in the air by Satella's arms, he took a handkerchief that turned into a dagger. He then proceeds to stab himself in the throat, causing a death by suicide. The fifth and final death in Arc 4 happens in Chapter 68. This death happens after Emilia and Subaru have their heartfelt moment. Emilia then kisses Subaru as he fades towards his death. Death by blood loss. This is all the deaths in Arc 4. Now let's move on to Arc 5. The first death within Arc 5 happens in Chapter 19, coming from the Synarch Bishop of Wrath herself, Ceres. Having watched a small boy plummet to his death using the authority of Wrath, the same pain and death that the boy felt, Subaru along with the audience that watched him felt the same death. Death number 2 of Arc 5 takes place in the neighboring chapter, Chapter 20. Affected by Wrath's authority, Subaru's emotions were chained with the boys. Due to Ceres' speech, the fear among the two were amplified and shared infinitely until Subaru essentially was scared to death. The last death of Arc 5 comes at Chapter 22. Using the authority of Wrath, having linked everyone in the square feelings together, Reinhardt shows up and chops Ceres in half. Doing so calls for everyone in the crowd to die in the same manner, including Subaru. Arc 5 deaths are concluded. On to Arc 6 we go. With Arc 6, I will be going by the deaths quite fast because there are a lot, and Arc 6 holds the most amount of deaths within a single arc in all of ReZero. Also, Arc 6 has more total deaths than all arcs combined. With that being said, let's talk about the deaths. Deaths 21 and 22 are done by the same person, so I decided to include them together. The first takes place on Chapter 10, and the other takes place on Chapter 11. The perpetrator of Subaru's death was Shala, using her arrow-like attack to scope out and kill Subaru before he got close to the tower. The 23rd death was by a centaur-like mob beast on Chapter 13. Here, he was brutally burned alive, marking the first time Subaru has ever been burned alive as a death. Next death happened on Chapter 15. Subaru was brutally eaten to death by Petras after having gone mad from the witch's miasma. Taking a break from dying, Subaru comes back and dies on Chapter 37 and 38. This time, he dies from a fall from his death. At the time, the killer was unknown, but it was later revealed to be Mei Li who actually pushed Subaru to his death. Death 27 takes place on Chapter 42. Subaru has been decapitated by an unknown mysterious killer on the balcony of the Watchtower. Chapter 54 marks the 28th death in the series. The death comes from the engulfment of Satella's shadow showing up at the Watchtower. Same as 54, at Chapter 65, Subaru along with everyone inside the tower was also engulfed in the darkness of Satella's shadow. Finally, at the 30th death, getting close to the end, but death number 30 arrives from Chapter 69. He was cut down by Reed Australia. Chapter 70. Subaru killed himself via suicide. He had jumped from a ledge and plummeted to his death. Second to last chapter death was Chapter 71. Subaru in this chapter had been killed by Reed Australia once again. The last chapter death is Chapter 72. This chapter is said to have 15 deaths, however only 3 were actually shown within the chapter. The first shown death was a kill from Lay Baton Katos, one of the Synarch Bishops of Gluttony. The second shown death was from an army of mob beasts that killed Subaru. The last death within the series comes from, once again, Reed Australia. In total, Subaru has died 47 times, with the last chapter of deaths accumulating 15 whole deaths. Now, my question to you all, did you all get this right? Did you all guess the correct number? I doubt that unless you already knew, because 47 is a wild number. I didn't even think about that many deaths. I thought it'd be around maybe 20 something, but 47 is definitely big. I never expected Arc 6 to hold so many deaths. My boy was suffering. But anyway, I hope you all have enjoyed this video. Thank you all for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe for more ReZero content. And I'm out.